Welcome, soldiers. Welcome, students. Welcome, student soldiers, to our final week together in English 1A, Composition and Reading. English Composition and Reading. I'm going to try to release a few short videos to complement the slides that I've recently attached to the announcements that are an attempt to summarize what we've done this semester. Those of you able to come into the classroom this week, that will be tomorrow and Wednesday, we'll be able to go over this and have Q&A in class and all that. And of course have a final exam on Wednesday. It's all happening so fast, right? I am trying to structure the final exam so it can be completed in class or out of class, and there will be some requirements that are strict. For example, the online component of the grading, anything that is submitted via Canvas, will probably have a hard deadline of the 15th. I'm guessing at midnight, that night, it's at 23:59. But anything to do with your writing stuff that you can kind of informally get back and forth to me on before the 19th should be reasonable. So I foresee some flexibility in assessing your final grades. So not to worry if your schedules are getting very, very busy right now. Of course they are. So let's try to just kind of give you an overview of the slides you're going to see. Try to give you an overview without getting into the detail as we would in a classroom. And if I can spot any details that are missing, I can of course fill them in by talking with you right now. I would suggest printing them out, bringing them as handouts, or just taking them as handouts with you out in the field. All right. So, without further ado, okay. So, back in week 1, we talked about the catalog description of this course, right? Kind of an important thing, because the catalog is sort of the our marketing to you guys. And our marketing to you guys was that English composition and reading offers instruction in expository and argumentative writing, appropriate and effective use of language, close reading, cogent thinking, research strategies, information literacy, and documentation. So that sounds like a lot, and in fact, as you'll soon you'll see in the next slide there, it's actually 7 different learning areas kind of spelled out for us there in the course description. Those areas being writing, diction, cogent thinking, close reading, research strategies, documentation, and information literacy. However, it's not necessary to provide equal weighting to all of those skills areas in a composition course, and in fact it would be nonsense. Really the pinnacle of this is your ability to read, analyze, and respond to college level articles and essays. Okay, so we've jumped into an article very early in our semester, a research article, and we were able to read and analyze that. We did not respond to that. All right, so that evolved into our expository essays, right? So the first intended learning outcome is to read, analyze, and respond to college level articles or essays. So we responded verbally in both speaking and writing activities in class. We've also focused on the second intended learning outcome of this course, which is to incorporate research into essays. Okay, so you guys are finding sources, incorporating research into essays using the Modern Language Association documentation style. That's the MLA style. Now, perhaps I have not been clear enough, and I want to make it clear here, that the MLA style is what's required, and that's all that's really going to be measured here. I do want you to be able to read documents in the APA formatting style, because a good majority of the research you find is going to be in APA documentation. So you need to understand when, in which situations we use the author date referencing of the APA, and in which situations the author title referencing of the MLA is more appropriate. However, you do not need to compose using the APA. So don't want you to have to sweat out the details on that. I think recognition is good enough for this task. So we really have to simplify it, we have 2 learning outcomes, but with the 7 different kind of skills areas that are encompassed in those 2 learning outcomes. All right. So we started off very early, talking about the modes of composition, how we mix them up. And this is just natural. It's the way humans communicate, whether we're speaking or writing. We are mixing modes of communication. And so it's very easy to conflate the modes of communication with the various genres of writing, including essays, including articles, the target of our our course syllabus, what we want you to understand, to be able to read and analyze, right? But there are other genres too, such as short stories and novels. There's prose. So prose is something that you'll be getting into should you take English 1C later on. So within a particular genre, you will find mixed modes of communication also, right? Very early on, I tried to show you within that research article, help you notice that there's some narrative in the description of the research methods, the process they used, the steps they took, right? That would also encompass a process description, right? An exposition of process also. In the introduction to the research, the description of that situation, right? Of the athletes. I think they were the Muslim athletes and the Christian athletes, and they're presenting the situation. Could we get these people to get along in this war-torn area? Then the expository, we find in the classifications, right? In every time you try to present a table and classify people or objects or anything. So we're getting in some classifications. When we deal with instructions, we're dealing with processes. Anytime we're dealing with persuasion, we are dealing with argument, and in the case of the academic world that you're entering, argument is expected to use more of the logical means of appeal, as opposed to, say, the ethos or the pathos, which we've talked about ad infinitum in this class. So part of my approach to composition is to help you recognize that you're mixing up modes of composition in your writing, and perhaps to notice that in your readings also. So also helping you connect these modes of communication with modes of thinking, right? We talked one day in the classroom, we were comparing modes of reasoning to modes of communication, right? Modes of composition. Telling stories, that's narration, right? When we polarize 2 things, right, we are contrasting, right? When we kind of put things together and say, hey, these two guys are great, we are comparing them, putting them in the same category. So, right, extensions of classification, right? So anything we're writing about is really an extension of our thinking. We talked, I want to give you kind of a brief introduction to toll mean logic, which I hope you will look up and get some of these basics here. The basic is the simplified version where you have data, or which is your evidence, and you're using it to support a claim, which is your conclusion. And it's not enough to simply throw some data and say, because of this, this is true. You have to say, because of this and my thinking, right? You're going to tie it all together. This is true. So that's called warranting. You have to warrant that claim with the data, the evidence you're providing. So it's a 3-point, kind of more of a modern way of being logical. Now, I would add that you could actually add any type of appeal on top of the toll mean approach, right? For example, the warrant could be an ethical appeal. It could be a pathetic appeal, right? It could be something like that if it is effective in tying the data to the claim. Although that is not logical, right? So we have to keep in mind these situations where we write. So when we're writing in the academic world, academia, college, right? Try to focus more on the logical appeals. So we did talk about the toll mean logic a bit, and we definitely talked about your thesis and your thesis statement, right? The idea that a statement is a sentence, a thesis is a sentence, a thesis is your main point, right? And a statement tells you something about that main point, right? And readers of essays, particularly readers of essays, expect a thesis statement to be embedded within that first paragraph. And if it's not, it's going to drive your readers bonkers because they'll be confused, right? So you could do it one of two ways. You could combine into a single sentence, or you can maybe split into two sentences. I would do more than that. Keep it simple, but keep them in that introductory paragraph. All right? And let's see what else. Yeah, we talked about the writing situation. I'll see, that was week 4, right? Think of it as a square, right? Really, there's 4 things going on, right? There's the audience. Who's your audience? Your persona. Who are you, right? Purpose. What is your purpose in writing to that audience? And what is the actual message that you're giving to that audience? So all 4 are intertwined. Okay, so like for example, your persona in your field, you could probably relate to this quite clearly. There are certain ways of talking with the public when you're in uniform versus, say, when you're in your casual clothes out on a weekend, right? So your persona can affect your modes of communication, situationally, right? So who's who are you? Your audience is your audience, Mr. Parker, your professor, right? I'm going to encourage you not to make me your audience, to imagine a perhaps broader audience, an audience that you might actually like to reach with your ideas. And I'm simply just kind of an observer looking in, trying to help you cobble this together. It's composition, right? So try not to, sweat your GPA and think of me as your audience, but think of whomever as your audience is important in constructing the message and perhaps in the purpose of that message, right? So your writing is situational, as is everything in life, right? Let's see. We did talk about grammar, and just let you know, this is not a grammar course. This is a composition course, English composition. So it presupposes you know English, you know some things about grammar. That being said, you're likely to make some grammatical mistakes, and some of these mistakes will cause confusion for your reader. To make assessment efficient, I'm really I'm looking at those things that make confusion for your reader, right? So one of those is what we call the comma splices. Look that up. You can find all kinds of stuff about comma splices online. And the details of reported speech. Okay, now you got to look this up in your MLA documentation, because it's part of MLA documentation that is to do with the referencing, which is actually putting what they said in quotes, or sometimes just deciding whether to put it in quotes or simply paraphrase it. But either way, you have to cite it and reference it. So you're going to get into some documentation, some stylistics there. All right. So, look into a sentence combining. I will upload some sentence combining materials. Note to self, sentence combining. We had a few in class. Most of them were okay. One of them was kind of a dud. So I'll put most of them except the one online here. And get used to the fanboys, the conjunctions for those coordinating conjunctions, and also some of the phrases for subordinating conjunctions. So that you can start combining sentences, embedding, transforming, and so forth. Let's see. We talked quite a bit about structure, didn't we? Structure is key. So we looked, for example, at the standard 5-paragraph essay. That is a structure that you were probably exposed to in high school, or earlier than that possibly. But it's simply introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion, each one being a single paragraph. This was probably really good practice, I think, because there's a lot within that type of structure that still is applicable to more expanded structures. The introduction and conclusion, for example. I think you may recall the day when I drew the hamburger through the body paragraphs in the middle. But you need those 2 pieces of bread to kind of hold it together, and I don't know. So yeah, you need a conclusion that has elements of a summary and a reminder of the outline of the entire paper there, right? So like if a professor just reads that concluding paragraph, they should be able to outline your paper in their head. Seriously. So that's something to think about. It's just helping people understand your thinking by repeating patterns, right? Think of it as a form of parallelism, right? We talked about that once also, parallelism. So we talked also about things that you need to read and understand, and this was where it could get confusing. This is where I say learning the APA referencing is really more helpful for you at this point as a reader and as a researcher, because you're going to be looking at these lists of references, and you need to understand there's a difference in the pattern and a purposeful difference in the pattern from the MLA pattern. Okay, so but most research articles will follow the APA standard for a research paper, which is it's nicknamed the IMRD, right? Introduction, methods, research, results, discussion, and conclusion. IMRD, right? Introduction, methods, results, discussion, and then a conclusion. So the conclusion is something I kind of added there because the discussion kind of merges to a conclusion. But the most essential thing is the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So The point is to understand how to read a research paper. I do not want you to go to write a full-blown research paper. Because that's not at the point of this course, right? Remember, it's to help you read, analyze, and understand an article, which we are, a research article. You're understanding the research structure, and to write essays. So I think that's enough. Anyway, I do expect you to find a couple of sources and practice writing them in the MLA style. So expository and argumentative essays are basically the two types I'm hoping to give you some good foundation in, and hopefully you can continue developing strength in those. The argumentative, I'm trying to help you understand that the difference in expectations, say between the modern world, the academic, very logos-centric world, and in the classical world, where ethos, logos, and pathos, anything goes. But also help you recognize that even in modern, civil society, right, the classical appeals still apply. It's it's gloves off, right, as far as persuasion goes. So this is going to be very helpful in your reading comprehension, and particularly in developing your critical thinking and ability to analyze these texts that you find that are trying to persuade you. So there's expected structures, such as the IMRAD structure, right? There's also expected documentation styles, right? And little minutiae that are so important. For example, at the end of an APA listing, it will say references, and then a list. At the end of an essay that is using the MLA format, it will say works cited, right? So those are very important, these details. So composition, you will eventually get down to details, right? And the devil is in the details, as they say, right? We reviewed some brainstorming strategies, right? One of them that I find effective is called the KWL method. Just what do I know already? W, what do I want to know? L, how can I learn more about it, right? So this KWL, know, want to know, learn more, can kind of help you as you research, help you frame, as you are composing a paper, it helps you stay in scope, right? Use your KWLs to stay in scope, right? Some things that can help you kind of get your brain lubricated. One of them was free writing. Remember, you can write for, say, 10, 15 minutes on an issue, and then stop, pause, read what you wrote, and then write a single sentence called the center of gravity. Try to sum up the gist of your very recent thinking. And then, later on when you're sitting at your desk, you'll find that can help inform the structure of the major compositions that you're working on now, which I'm assuming you're working on now, right? And different professors have different writing processes, but I think all would concur that a writing process is important. I would encourage you to cultivate a writing process that does involve intermediate drafts and purposeful intermediate drafts. There's no rule as to how many intermediate drafts, but at some point you're going to do a final draft where you want to polish every little thing. It's like you're getting ready for inspection, guys, seriously, so polish every little sentence. Okay. English composition. Okay, what did we study? Okay, so yeah, we kind of want to wrap this up. We're getting almost to a half hour, which I think is kind of near the typical attention span here for a sit-down lecture like this, where we can't break up with questions and so forth. So just recall that our learning outcomes are just twofold. One, read, analyze, and respond to college-level articles or essays, and two, incorporate research into the essays we write using the MLA documentation style. So keep it simple. KISS, you know that means, right? I did add up to 100 here. Okay, 30% is your expository essay, 40% is your argumentative essay, 10% is participation, 20% is your final exam. And for participation, I am monitoring the emails and private communications coming back and forth, as well as the Canvas traffic. And it's midnight, so I better knock it off and try to get a good night's sleep and come in and see you all tomorrow. So have a good night, ladies and gentlemen.